I'm Claudia Pfeiffer, the Georgia Orstrom Jr. Head Curator at the National Sporting Library and Museum, and I'm really excited to be recording this overview of Charles Rumph's life, a photographer who will be featured in our collection and wonderful series of images that we'll be discussing today. Shirley, would you take a moment, please, to introduce yourself and give a little bit of a background?
Oh, sure. I'm Shirley Johnson, Claudia, and I am the wife of Charles Rumph. We were together almost 50 years, and I met him during one part of his career, which I will tell you about shortly. And so when I prepared for this interview, I went through the archives he had left, and I was amazed at the things he had kept. Great detail, and I learned things about him I never knew.
So what were some of the surprises?
Well, the surprises was particularly about his music career, which I'm going to go through in a few minutes. He had 3 careers in his life. First, it was music. Second, it was law. And third, it was a photographer. And when one was over, it was over, and he moved on. So we'll be going through those in a little bit.
So this is intriguing to me. You didn't know that he was a musician?
I did, but he only told me a little bit about it. And then when I went through the articles that he had saved on his music career, I was just absolutely astounded.
Yeah, because it was, I mean, it was a real deal. I mean, you knew he had a degree in music, though, right? Or
I knew he had a degree in music. I knew that he had worked as a band director in some schools. And what I didn't know is what a huge success he was. When he was just 19 years of age and out of college, he got his first job upon graduating. And that was with a band, a school district in Rockdale, Texas, where he was from. And what I found I didn't know about is that his band had won many prizes. And we might show those slides now if we can.
Sure.
Claudia.
I'm going to pull this over here. Oh, no. Technical difficulties.
I think they're 7, 8, and 9.
Yep. I'm just going to scooch this over so I can drive from here. Okay, there we go. So there's 7.
Well, this was when he started with the Rockdale School District, and it was an interview with him that gives some of his background. And he looks very young there, and as you will see, different than he looks later on. And then the next 2 slides are about the honors they won, RHS for Rockdale High School. And this was about, he had 2 bands, junior high, senior high, and they were in the Waco district for bands. And in this contest, out of 110 bands, they won 3 first prizes, 2 seconds, and 1 third. And included among the awards was one on sight reading, where the band had to play a piece they'd never seen before. And the judges said it was like they had worked on it for 3 months. It was so good. And then the next slide was on another contest in 1952 in Houston. And it was, they were there as a visiting band. They weren't technically in the Houston area region. And they became the first visiting band to ever win a prize. And they got second prize. And to me, this is so amazing because he's only 2 years older than his students.
Right.
And he's winning all these prizes with them. Another thing that is really amazing about his career is his performances. When he was 19 years old, before this, well, he was still in college, he played French horn with the Houston Symphony. He played with a lot of dance bands, and we have to remember now, this is in the 40s. So dance bands are really important nationally. And Glenn Miller, of course, was one of the best known. And as everyone probably knows, Glenn Miller was killed during World War II. And Charles played with two bands that had the Glenn Miller playbook. One was Tex Beneke. One was Eddie Gerlach, who was especially well known in Texas. He also traveled with a Mexican band up and down the coast between Houston and Corpus Christi, playing dance music. So with the Tex Beneke band, amazingly, at this young age, he was playing in New York City at the Empire Room at the Waldorf Astoria. And they were in Soho, staying in Soho. And, you know, the stories he had of coming from these small towns and going to the great big city and seeing life at a whole different fashion, and everybody smoking and drinking. And, you know, he wasn't old enough to drink at that point. And then in addition, he had told me once that he had formed his own band. And I didn't know a thing about it other than he told me that, just kind of in passing. And then when I'm going through his archives, I found this advertisement. And this is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he had formed the Chuck Rumph Quintet that was playing at this nightclub, really, which says they have the best food in town.
So did he go by Chuck when he was younger?
He must have. Though when I knew him, it was, well, he was known in the law generally as Charlie. And that's how I first met him, it was Charlie. And soon thereafter, he informed me he really preferred Charles. So in his later years, after I got to know him, it was always Charles. So I was also surprised to see this Chuck in there.
That's funny. So did he ever describe or discuss why he made the changes that he made?
Yeah, he became a lawyer next. And after he did these high schools, was directors of the bands in these high schools, he got a master's degree at the University of New Mexico in college administration. But interestingly enough, he didn't go into that, but he was hired by Long Beach City College to be the director of their band there. And he told the stories of getting this marching band together every weekend to play at the football games, and how hard it was to get all the kids there and organized and whatever. And I'm sure he did a very good job based on what he did previously. So anyway, in Long Beach, he got married to a lovely person who was a dear friend of mine till she died. And he decided he either needed to get a PhD or go to law school. He said he chose law school because that was what he had been counseled to be, was an attorney in high school. So he was admitted to the University of California, Berkeley, which is now known as Boalt Hall, which was a very prestigious law school. And then he went on to have some amazing adventures as a lawyer. Now, Charles's first position, he had two in the law. The first one was as Deputy Attorney General of California, which was a very desirable, prestigious position to have. He was a beautiful writer, and soon after he was there, he was asked to be the speechwriter for the Attorney General. It was an elected office, and this was for his campaign. So Charles left the law for a little bit, traveled with the campaign, and became acquainted with political figures, such as this slide 10, where he is there with Ted Kennedy. And Charles even thought about running for office himself in California. Now, as well as being the speechwriter, in his usual job with the Attorney General's office, he was the lobbyist for the Attorney General in the California legislature. So he was traveling back and forth to Sacramento, arguing in favor of legislation that the Attorney General's office wanted. A resume that he left states that he briefed and argued 109 criminal and civil appeals in California courts and the Supreme Court. And that in addition, in his 11 years with the AG's office, he litigated 140 federal writs that were filed by state prisoners. And these were probably writs of some sort saying that they weren't guilty or whatever. And those were litigated federal district courts, Court of Appeals in the Ninth Circuit, and the US Supreme Court. But there was one thing that he was most proud of in his legal career. And that's shown on slide 11. Thanks, Claudia. This was a brief. You see his name at the bottom of it. And in the law, the person who really writes the brief's name is usually at the bottom and the officials are at the top, such as the Attorney General, Tom Lynch, which was the one he wrote speeches for, and Charlie O'Brien, who was the chief deputy, and Charles was deputy AG. And it was an amicus brief, or friend of the court brief, filed with the US Supreme Court, in which the state of California was arguing on the side of Japanese who'd been interned during World War II. And the issue was reparations. Should they get back their bank accounts that the US government had seized? So as you can see, the suit was against the Attorney General of the United States. They did win the case, was won. It was a case where the legal issue was whether the statute of limitations had passed for the Japanese Americans to get reparations, get their bank cuts back. And Charles felt most proud of that because he felt the Japanese Americans were so badly treated by the US.
Fascinating.
And then the next part of his career, which brought us together, came about because he had testified on behalf of the state of California before a US House committee. And at the hearing was Don Alexander, who's in the picture on the right, who was commissioner of attorney of the IRS. He heard Charles speak, and he called him a couple of days later, and he said, "I really need your help back here in Washington. Would you please come?" And Charles said, "Yes." I was living in Washington, and that's when the romance started. So here in this picture, he's being given some sort of an award by Don Alexander. He was a director of the IRS that was perhaps best known because when Richard Nixon wanted him to look at the tax returns of people that Nixon called enemies, Alexander refused to do so.
Wow.
So he was there a long time, 11 years, and during that time he was doing photography. And that, of course, is what this talk is really about. While he still lived in California, Charles became interested in photography, and he studied with a famous photographer, Peter Stackpole, who was one of the first 4 life photographers. He and Peter were friends. Peter let him use his dark room, which he didn't let any of his other students use. And he recognized his talent because early on, he was urging Charles to exhibit his work and to have it published. So Charles's first publication of his work was November 26, 1972. And it was in the Sunday magazine of the Examiner and Chronicle newspapers. It was called Discovery Under the Oaks, and it was realism. It was about a cemetery in Santa Rosa, California. And that was the first, and of course he was still deep in his legal career at that point. Charles did a lot with his photography, like with his other careers. Claudia. Yeah. He taught numerous classes. He took master classes of more experienced photographers to Europe, to France, and to Italy in particular. He published an enormous amount. He was into everything that a photographer would be, and eventually he left the law to become a freelance photographer, where his real specialty was architecture. But he did a lot of other things that were really interesting. In the art world, he did black and white, abstract photographs of existing things. He never manipulated them. He never did anything with them digitally. In fact, he never took a photo with a digital camera. This was long before, with film and the darkroom in our house, developing it and printing it with this huge Italian Durst enlarger that's probably, well, when it's on a table, it's over 5 feet tall. Many of his black and white photographs were published, were in exhibitions all over the world, Japan, France, Greece, and of course throughout the United States at different places. There's just 3 of them I put in here to give an idea of his abstractions. This first one here, he was very proud of. He was very sentimental about it. And it was published a number of times, including in a publication of the Washington Center of Photography called Meet the Masters, at which he was a featured speaker. He never wanted people to ask Where are they from? Where did you take that? What's the subject? Because he wanted you just to look at the photograph and enjoy the shapes, the difference of the colors, appreciate it as a piece of art without being dwelling on where he took it. But I'm going to tell you anyway. This is a portion of a sculpture on the Princeton campus that he took when his daughter and son were students there. And it was located in the Engineering Triangle, in case you ever want to go to Princeton and see it. It was entitled Upstart 2, made in 1979. The Princeton Museum now has a copy in their collection, which they were very pleased to have.
Wonderful.
And the name of this photograph is Cum Subertad, Come Sweet Death.
Komm, süßer Tod. Yeah, German.
Süßer Tod, you're right. Pronunciation, thank you. Yeah, he really loved this photograph. And I think it was because he was sort of a poignant person. You know, he could hear music and tears would come to his eyes. And he had this really emotional quality. And of course, with death, we certainly associate emotion. And then there are two other photographs we're going to look at, just to show you the diversity of his work. This is one here. This was taken in Greece. It's two churches. And of course, the beauty of it is the angles, the shade of gray. Many of his photographs of abstractions were geometric, but as we see with the next one, there were also curves.
Mm-hmm.
Now you might think that's a woman, but actually it was a staircase in Mexico City. And while I was upstairs suffering from the local germs, he was out photographing. And this is one of his photos that was exhibited by the Phillips Collection when they had a solo exhibition of his work. But this shows the contrast in them. He loved geometry, but he also liked curves.
They're fascinating, this idea of looking at the intersections of roof lines and staircases and zooming in on it so that it's not at all obvious as a building anymore is absolutely intriguing.
Right, right. And that's what it was all about for him. And there are many of these, and these were exhibited in many, many places. Exhibitions became kind of commonplace to me, although I am looking forward to the one at the Sporting Museum after COVID is over.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, over. No longer have to wear masks. That's what I'm looking forward to.
I think we all are.
Yeah. Now, get to what this interview wants to focus on: women and horses.
Did we want to jump back and look at the photograph of the master class? The first one?
I can't remember which one that is.
It's on the screen.
Oh, yes. You know, Claudia, there's an important thing we haven't talked about. What is that?
His personality.
Oh, you are so right. His personality was big. He was a smiling person. His enthusiasm was absolutely contagious. I think the best description of him is, first of all, a couple of quotes I'm going to read to you. The first one was a column that was in his high school newspaper when he was about 16. And the column was called Hall of Fame, and Charles was featured. And it states, what does it take to convulse a school with laughter? A cheery hello, a dry and witty remark, or a teasing smile? These are all characteristic of Charles Rumph. They seem to follow each other around. And that was Charles, not only at the age of 16, but as an adult. And we would go to a social affair, and pretty soon there was a crowd of people around him while he was telling stories and just keeping a conversation going. He was a great conversationalist. The second quote was sent to me. The quote wasn't sent to me. It was in a letter from Mary Johns, who was one of his adult pupils. And she had written it to him recently, not knowing that he was deceased. So she sent me both the note she had written to him and then one to me. She was an adult student of his in France and in Greece, master classes. And everyone that he taught was experienced in photography. I should add that a number of them had exhibitions, sold their photographs, etc. Anyway, Marabee wrote to him, "Your enthusiasm was contagious. Every time I see sunlight streaming across a rough surface, I think of you in Greece, holding up your hands to a wall, saying with such excitement, 'Look at that, look at that. Just look at the light.'" And then when I went through his archives, I found this photo and I thought, oh, isn't that exactly what she was saying? To go on a walk with Charles was really an amazing experience because his eyes were so alive and he would see things I would have never seen, but he would point to shadows, to light, to shapes. It was just truly an eye-opener. So this is Charles. This is in France, actually, at a limestone quarry, which he went to a number of times. He thought there were lots of shapes and angles and whatever to show there. It's in Provence, not too far from Arles in France. I have a few other pictures of him with his big smile. This is a self-portrait that he took that I've always loved. It's in our garden. He's leaning against one of our trees.
Do you know if he had a remote clicker or did he run?
I think he ran. I think he put on a timer and then he just went and posed. And this, of course, of him is later in life, but again, with that big smile. And this is us when we were young. This was also a photo he took that he put the camera up on a tripod and came set next to me. We're in Maine, in Bar Harbor. This is probably the mid-1970s. It's
a great photo. I love your dress.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And you noticed how it's an art photo too, because look how the tree is on the right. The composition to him just seemed to be natural. It was nothing anyone taught him. It was just the way he saw things. So balanced, and you know, for a snapshot like that, yeah, I think it's really artful.
Do you remember how many photographs you took? Was it a one-time deal, or did you take several versions of it?
You know, he probably took a couple, but this is the only one that I've ever seen or remember. And then this is near the end of his life, and you see he's still smiling away despite Parkinson's and dementia and having had cancer. He was just a good-natured sweetheart, and I know I was very, very fortunate that he could maintain this despite the frustrations in his life of not being able to photograph anymore.
When did he take his last photos?
It would have been in the early 2000s. Prostate cancer came first, from which he recovered, but then the dementia started taking over. And of course, with that, there's trembling, which we had pretty well controlled with medication, but still not enough that he could really photograph. He did do one major portfolio after Women and Horses, which has never been exhibited, that is quite gorgeous. It's abstractions of reflections of objects in color. And of course, once again, they're abstract. You can't tell what they are, but the colors and the shapes are extraordinarily beautiful.
All right, I think we're ready to shift gears now. We'll jump up to
Horses.
yeah. Slide 16.
Yeah. Charles was born and raised in Texas, and he was a Texas boy, a Western boy. What did they do as a Western boy? Well, it was an outdoor lives. It was camping, it was hiking, it was Boy Scouts, it was the Boy Scout camp. And for Charles, it was a lot of involvement with horses. Now, and he did many things with horses. He said he owned 3 of them. He rode in rodeos, which is what this slide 16 reminds us of. He did all kinds of horse riding, and I couldn't find any archives of them, so I don't know any great details, but all I know, he was in rodeos.
So funny.
Yeah. So horses were kind of certainly in his DNA in a way. He was an Eagle Scout, and he was one at the time where only 1% of scouts ever became an Eagle Scout, which he did in 1948. So it would have been right before his 17th birthday, so he'd been 16th. And I wanted you all to see, among his many, many Scout awards, was horsemanship in 1949, August 3. One of his activities that he did, but it was really only for 4 years, because they didn't allow people there before the age of 14, and then he probably left when he was 18, was at the Philmont Scout Camp, which was near Cimarron, New Mexico. It's 214 square miles. It's in the Rocky Mountains. It's really, really rugged territory, and there were a lot of activities there. But as this picture shows, this was senior training in horsemanship, and you see how many horses were there around. And this is a postcard that he wrote to his mother, which I thought was so sweet. And on it he says, "Dear Mom, I really like my job," because he was a camper there for a couple of years, and then they hired him to work with them. I think it was $80 a month he was paid to do various things at the Scout Ranch. And this was probably in the period he was working for them. He says, "I'm chief garbage can cleaner. I am enjoying myself. Please write Harold's address." That was the brother that was closest to him. "Please send me my eagle ring." And I never did find that eagle ring. I wish I could have. And then he says, "I'm a little homesick." Love, Charles.
It's great.
Just shows, to me, that's just so sweet. Well, being an outdoor boy, he did a lot of hiking. And when he was 16, he fell down a mountain. It was amazing that he survived. He was with a scout troop. And it was an Associated Press story, which said he fell 45 feet. There's other reports that says it wasn't that far. But in any case, he went tumbling down this mountain, which was covered with shale. And very hot in the summertime. It was just before, well, it was June 1st, actually, that he fell. And the Boy Scout leader had some medical background, so he had the boys take off their pants, cut sapling trees, and put it through the pant legs to make a stretcher to carry him down the mountain, which took several hours. And when they got down the mountain, they were met by a forest ranger who put him in the back of a pickup truck. The temperature was over 100 degrees, and drove him for another 3 or 4 hours to the closest town called Alpine, Texas. And there the local doctor kept him overnight, and then a plane was hired to take him to Baylor University the next morning. What was clearly bad was he had lots of broken bones, but he also had a depressed skull fracture. And for the rest of his life, he had this dent on the left side of his head that was quite large. Anyway, this doctor in Alpine knew a famous Italian brain surgeon, Dr. De Ricci, and he was the one that operated on Charles. This was the early days of penicillin. You know, this is not long after World War II. And they gave him a shot of penicillin every hour, day and night.
Wow.
And he said the nurses were so kind to him because he was this young boy who was so badly injured. And until they got the brain cleaned up, they didn't set any of his bones. And the timing of it couldn't have been worse because Charles had been elected to go to Boys State, which was where they were taught about government, particularly local government, and in which they actually became the role of a mayor, a representative, you know, very, very politically oriented, neutral in the political party, but it was government. So he didn't get to go there, and that was a great disappointment. So he had to spend the rest of the summer at home, lying on his back in bed. He was young, he healed quickly, never had any negative results from it, except probably his dementia was caused, or at least contributed to, by that brain damage.
How much of it did he remember the day of?
He remembered quite a bit, amazingly. And he remembers, you know, being in the back of this pickup truck and the heat and, you know, the doctor there in Alpine and all night of it. And being this really curious person, as you might have guessed, he remembered that in the plane, there was a nurse with him, of course, and he kept trying to lift up his head and look out. Because, of course, he hadn't been in a plane before. He wanted to see what was out there, and she kept pushing him down. So anyway, there were lots of articles on it. You know, there we see his condition was fair, and it was a very traumatic thing in his life. But that what comes from being a Western boy.
Yep.
So I think I may have mentioned that he owned some horses. He was very involved with them. When he became a freelance photographer, the Washington Post hired him to do a number of stories for their Sunday magazine. And one of the stories was on Laurel Race Course in Maryland. And Charles took the photos, which became the longest story that they had ever published, and of course gave him a byline on the front of the magazine, as well as the photo. The text was written by Lou Cannon, who was well known at that time as the White House correspondent for the Post. But he was chosen to write it because he loved horse racing. So he put the words to Charles's photos. And this was the beginning of Women and Horses. Because what Charles discovered when he was on the racetrack, the number of young women that were working in the backlots. And that amazed him at all the things they were doing with horses. So on his own, he started exploring women and horses. And at some point along the way, he and a man named Bill Robbins, who had curated one of his black and white shows, went to the International Museum of the Horse in Lexington, Kentucky, and talked about having an exhibit there. And the director of the museum, Bill Cook, who's now retired, looked at examples of Charles's work and said, yes, we'd love to have an exhibition. So Charles then did a lot of photographs in Kentucky. He also took photos in Virginia, in Maryland, and in New York State. And that resulted in the Women and Horses exhibition, the photos which your museum now has. His purpose in this show, which had in its title Celebration, was exactly what it was to him, was to honor the young women, and as he said, not so young, who worked in all parts of the horse world. They were farriers, surgeons, therapists, and that was massage therapists, owners, trainers, jockeys, teachers, breeders, exercise riders, hunters, competitors, who worked with all breeds of horses, thoroughbreds, saddlebreds, standardbreds, ponies, draft horses, cutting horses. And he wanted to show them and honor them for all the things that they had done and which horses were dependent on.
Had an exhibition like this ever been done before that you're aware of?
No, it was unique.
Yep.
And that will be pointed out by a number of the reviewers of the show, that he really brought a fresh eye to horse art. The exhibition, this is the catalog for it. It was exhibited in Lexington during the peak of their attendance from early June into September of 1996. Part of it was exhibited at the Pegasus Gallery, which is in the Louisville airport. Another part was exhibited at the University of Maryland Art Gallery Museum. And then there was a fundraiser for the Bay School Cultural Arts Centers, at which Charles exhibited some of them and gave a talk.
So there were over 100 photographs, right, that would have been then distributed. The sections, in terms of, they were organized by different categories. So were there sections in different places? Do you have any knowledge of how it was decided where they were?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I think probably each had a variety of the photos that they displayed.
Okay.
we'll be going back to the catalog in a few minutes. I love this review, and there were other reviews too, but I love the headline, "Photographer is in the Winner's Circle." And this review points out something that you alluded to earlier, Claudia, that this was unique. And this review says that there are traditional pictures of horses with soldiers, kings, owners, racehorses, etc., of which there are some beautiful ones at your museum, Claudia. And the reviewer said, "A fresh look is overdue. Enter photographer Charles Rumph, who manages a fresh, keen eye." Likewise, the curator's statement, which is the next slide, picks up on the same thing. This was Bill Robinson who did the layout for the show along with Bill Cook, but mainly it was Bill who wrote about it. And he says in here that the exhibition circumvents traditional horse and rider photo tradition. He uses his camera looking for spontaneous, defining moments in everyday lives of the women's subjects. So again, there's a reference to this is not what has traditionally been done with horses. It's something fresh and new. And then there was an essay in the catalog by Catherine Tandy Brown, who said he shot straight from the heart. His love and enthusiasm for horses and their bond with women is apparent in every photo. And again, that goes back to, you know, his boyhood and all that time with horses. He loved them. He loved people too, because he made so many friends. And Claudia, you may have noticed one of the things I sent out to you was notebooks that he had on women and horses, and they were filled with names of people and there they are. And in them are so many people that he had contact with and he became friends with. And, you know, I spent some time with him in Lexington too, and got to know people, all of whom were so delighted with the show and were helping him out with introductions and so forth. So then the essay says that these photos are more than photojournalism. They are exquisite works of art due to Rumph's innate sense of design. And that's what I had pointed out to you before, that his composition, his sense of design was just innate. It was there. And then the reviewer also says, what distinguishes his work is his masterful use of light, something else we talked about previously. He loved to get up at 5 a.m. and be out there early dawn with the horses and the women exercising them. Morning was always very special to him because the light was so important in his life. And then she says, sometimes the effect is pure geometry. And that, again, is like a reference back to his black and white photographs. Other times, the light is like a painting with a palette knife. In fact, many people who see his photographs, particularly the black and white ones, feel like they are drawings, you know, that they are some other medium than photography. So those were the reviewers. And at this point, Claudia, I would like to talk a little bit about some of the photos. This again is the cover. There's a catalog with quite a few photos of works in it. I love all the pieces in this show. So when I talk to you about two of them, it's because of the length of time we have and not because that I'm pointing these out as better than others. the first one here, next slide, Claudia. Is a farrier who's putting on a horseshoe. And of course, you'll notice the composition, how she's a little off to the left and balanced by the right, the darker color there. Couple things to me were really remarkable about this picture. One was the color, but the way he was able to capture that smoke, which of course was moving, and of course her hand was moving to put in probably a nail into the horse's shoe. I just think it must have been so hard to capture that, but he did.
And it's also the idea, again, of the contrast between the light and the shadow.
Yes, yes, you're quite right. You're quite right. Yeah, yeah, he really wanted the light on that smoke. Yeah.
It's a striking photograph.
Yes, it is. And then this one is of dentist. And if you'll notice, there's actually two other people in the photo. There's one at the left, you can see the hands holding open the horse's mouth. And there's one on the right holding a flashlight. What I love in particular about this is the colors, the simplicity of them, the emphasis on the green. And of course, the composition is excellent, but look at how he caught that dentist's eyes, so concentrating on that horse's mouth, just looking so intently.
This is a difficult, it doesn't look like there was a real strong light source for this photo. So
Yes.
The idea that it's sharp also, it's really, I mean, it points back to his technical abilities.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. He truly loved making these photos. He felt so good about them. There was something that really, really warmed his heart. And I hope that people who see the show will truly enjoy them, see the art in them, appreciate the women.
We look forward to organizing it.
Now, there's something you haven't asked about, Claudia.
Uh-oh, I missed
that
something.
is relevant to every human being.
What's that?
What might that be? Well, where he was born.
Where was he born?
Where was he born? He was born in Amarillo, Texas.
What was his birth date?
His birth date was August 28, 1932. Depression years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he was the 7th of 10 children. Can you imagine? 7th of 10. No, I cannot either. He was baptized with water from the River Jordan. Someone had brought it over from the river. And he had a rose on his christening gown. And this is a picture of the leaves of that robe, which were just in a plain old envelope with a note on it from his mother about what it was. And it's amazing to me that those leaves are still intact after more than 80 years. Yeah. He lived in quite a few places in Texas. Oh, here is all 10 children. Charles is on the front row on the left, smiling as usual. His mom right above him. And of course his dad in the middle. But this is the only photo I found of all 10 of them. His brother George was killed in World War II when he was just 18. He was a fighter pilot flying from from England to the coast of France, trying to hit the submarine pins that the Germans had built there. There's a memorial at Cambridge to him and in St. Paul's Church with other people that died in World War II and who weren't found. But Charles did quite an exploration there, and he actually found someone who was in the plane next to the one that his brother was in and saw the plane go down into the ocean. So that was very hard to lose that brother. Charles was about 10 at the time he died, but all the others lived to adulthood. His father was a really interesting background. He was a mathematical prodigy, and he got out of high school so early that he couldn't be admitted to any college, so his parents sent him to a prep school. And he became an academic upon graduating. He taught at various colleges in Texas and was dean of one college. And then the Depression, of course, got really bad. The state of Texas went broke. They could no longer pay him. And there he was with all those mouths to feed. Yeah. So fortunately, his mother had gone to school with Sam Rayburn. Do you recognize his name at all, Claudia?
I don't, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, he was Speaker of the House of Representatives for a long time, very well respected, and your grandparents would clearly know his name. So his grandmother called Sam Rayburn and says, I got this unemployed son with this whole bunch of kids. Can you get him a job? So he did, and he got a job on the railroad sorting mail. And of course, your generation and a little bit into mine, your generation doesn't remember it, but I do, where there were men who were maybe they're women too at some point, who knows, who were on the railroad, and between cities, they would sort the mail as to what town it would go to. And then when they got to that town, they had this package of mail. They would lean out a window and they would put it on a hook, and then they would pick up other mail to go somewhere else. And then the sorting would go again. So he did that for a number of years. And then he later had a job measuring whether people were disabled or not. It was him, a doctor and a lawyer who were on the panel who would judge whether they were disabled and the amount of their disability. But he ended life as a mathematics professor at the University of New Mexico.
What a storied background.
Yeah, it really is. And his mother was just this sweet lady. She made most of the children's clothes, including suits. And you can imagine what it was like cooking for that gang of kids. Now, the older sisters, helped because you see there's a big range of ages here, from a babe in arms to clearly some grown-up boys, and the girls are probably high schoolers at least.
So one of the documents made mention of the idea that his mother was from Virginia.
Yes, Virginia, and then I think later on they moved to Kentucky. The background of both of their families is really, really quite interesting. Before I go to that, may I show you this next photo? Now, this is the kids that were remaining at the time of their mother's death. 3 sisters are here. There actually was another sister, but she was on outs with somebody in the family and didn't come to the funeral. And all the boys that were left, and you can see Charles there, second from left. He set up the photo, and I pushed the shutter.
Excellent.
But that's where they were as adults. You know, this is some information on the family history. You mentioned his mother, Claudia, so why don't you scroll down and we'll find the maternal background. The name Roy really came out of Egypt way, way back. Hindu history. And then his great-grandfather, Hugh Leroy, moved to France, then to England, and then his sixth great-grandfather moved to Westmoreland, Virginia. And then you see another reference to, again, Virginia. And then his third great-grandfather moved to Kentucky. So he has that in his background. And his mother, Mary Rosalie Roy, was born in Kentucky. Now, Charles was named after his grandfather. You see, his grandfather, Charles Armstrong Roy. And there is a long, it's well over 100 pages of the Roy family of Virginia and Kentucky, which I have a copy of. But it's like something like 140 pages. On his father's side, Christian Rumph had a big land grant in South Carolina, and he came from Frutigen, Switzerland. And Charles, the ever curious, went to Frutigen and found the family Bible in the church there, and the churchyard with the Rumph names on tombstones. Frutigen is a little village in the mountains in Switzerland, tiny. I think it's a tourist spot now. And, you know, he interviewed people there. And there are two members of his family that are really well known. Of course, there was the Revolutionary War general. They were huge landowners. There was 281,000 acres he owned, 50 land grants. And of course, after the Civil War, the family seemed to migrate to Texas. His second great-grandfather, David Rumph, there's a book written about him called This Man David. I found it in the Library of Congress. And 20 of his progeny were doctors. So at one point in Charles's life, when he was in high school, he was thinking of becoming a doctor. But his dad said, "You got music scholarships, so you're gonna study music." So he seemed to love it. So it worked out okay. But the most famous member of his family is Samuel Rumph. There's a marker in front of his house in Marshallville, Georgia. He bred the Alberta peach. And as I understand it, the Alberta peach was special because you could pull it apart and it wouldn't cling to the seed that was inside. It's a clean cut. It was named for his wife, and we have a lot of information on it, a lot of newspaper articles. In fact, Charles, being so gregarious, he was walking down our street in Georgetown, and he stopped and talked to some tourists. They were from Georgia. They heard his name, and they said, "Oh, we know all about your family," and they sent us many newspaper clippings. But anyway, the story's told that Mrs. Rumph was having a tea with a bunch of women, and her husband came in and talked to him and talked about this new peachy bread and said, "You know, what do I name it?" And somebody said, "Well, name it after your wife, your lovely wife, Alberta." So that's how it got its name. But as important of the peach was that he was the first person to ship peaches north to New York City. And it was the first time apparently New Yorkers had fresh peaches. And he invented a boxcar with ice that would get them there perfectly. And he is known as the founder of the peach industry in Georgia.
Fascinating.
There's other things on here too, such as this. I'm so fascinated by this Swiss ancestor who authored these 12 volumes on flora in the island of Ambonia, which was the Dutch East Indies in the 1600s. It was very fascinating looking at the family history. And as you can see, there's 3 books on the Rumph family. There was at least 2 private cemeteries that I know about, one in Texas, one in South Carolina. So Claudia, I think we're coming to the end of our story.
We are, and I had a couple of thoughts along the way. So,
sure.
How do you think Charles fit in with the DC, the regional, and the national photography culture, as it were?
Yeah, well, his abstract photography is totally unique in the research that I have done. I've really found nobody else that has done architectural photography that's abstract. And only can I find a picture or two where anything is sort of impressionistic, but you can still see what it is. So I think he was totally unique in that. In the Washington community, he was very well known through exhibitions, through his teaching. He taught at the Smithsonian, he taught at Glen Echo. He was invited to be a judge at many camera clubs that were in the area. I remember the Silver Spring Camera Club was especially large. The World Bank had a large one, but he did a lot of judging at that. So he was very well known here. Of course, when he showed overseas, he was known there. For example, the show in Japan was sold out, and it was held by a gallery, perhaps the first gallery named Ueda in Japan, which featured modern art. And besides Charles, they had a lot of well-known contemporary painters, US and otherwise. Internationally, you know, again, he was known in certain areas. So I think he will be known more as time goes by, and as more and more of his photos are put into museums.
Mm-hmm.
Besides the one I showed you, there's a number of others at the Princeton Art Museum. And since he died so recently, and COVID, which is slowing down everything.
Truth. So one of the other really fascinating ideas about him as a photographer, and I think really the idea of him as a polymath sort of is a background of that, looking at the way that he focused on abstraction and then switches gears and looks at very realistic compositions. Did he ever talk about what drove him in one direction or another, or if he saw them as having a different place artistically in his background?
He actually did quite a bit of realistic photography.
Mm-hmm.
He did a wonderful series of photographs on the National Cathedral in Washington, in which he used a view camera. And the details are just spectacular of the cathedral, and those were exhibited in the cathedral some years ago. He did some wonderful portraits, particularly of nuns in Greece. He did a lot with nature. There was quite a bit of realistic, but always art that he photographed, particularly in his early years. And the idea for abstractions came actually from our library. And one day he was sitting there and he looked up in the corner and the light was hitting it so that there was all these different shades of gray and shadows and light. And that's what started him on the path. So it opened his eye and he started looking around and he saw all these images. He also, of course, did a lot of realistic work, as he did a lot of advertising work, particularly for realtors, but he photographed art for others. He did an enormous amount of realistic work in those areas. So it was a mixture that he did. It was straight realism. Everything he did, to me, was art of some sort, but he did some realism that was just to create art. And then he had this abstract work.
Did you and or he ride as adults?
No.
So he never got on a horse again after he left Texas?
Never got on a horse again. Never played an instrument again after his music career. Now, part of that was that when you're doing a horn instrument, the embouchure, your lips have to stay in shape, the muscles, and you got to be playing frequently to do that. But yeah, it's kind of amazing to me how he just finished music, that was it. Finished law, that was it. And off to photography.
Did he talk about the transition from law to photography full time? What motivated him to leave one behind and take on the other full time?
Well, he was just in love with photography. It's what he enjoyed doing the most. Law after 20 some years is okay, but it wasn't where his heart was. His heart was with creating images.
So if you had one overarching statement that you would make about him, what would it be?
Enthusiastic, creative, gregarious, love of people.
That is a wonderful statement. So you had written a little note as your conclusion in your presentation.
Yeah, well, I like that one sentence, but I can add to it a little bit. He was truly a Renaissance man. Obviously, in this period of time, I can't add all the other things he did, such as in sports with golf and swimming, and his love of children. He could walk down the street and he'd look at a child and he'd say, "Hello, Cookie," and the child would be so excited, usually hold out their arms to him, and then he'd stand there and talk with the child and the parents for a while. I think in each of his careers, he really had unique opportunities. Certainly he didn't do things that most young lawyers did. They were very unusual. And the same way with his music, to have directed these bands, won prizes when he's about 2 years older than his students. We were concluding about his life that I think it was an extraordinary life. He had so many opportunities, unique ones. I know no young lawyer that probably had the exciting life he did. And remarkably, he achieved in everything that he tried, all three careers. And we didn't talk about his wonderful family, but his marvelous three children that I'm so proud to be friends with.
He really lived life to the fullest. I mean, there's just, as it's three lifetimes compressed into one. It's really just thank you so much for having the tenacity to put the presentation together and organize the discussion. I think this was a really wonderful opportunity to get it recorded and have it for posterity. So we'll look forward to using it in different ways to put programming together and get it online. And your enthusiasm and obviously your great love for your husband speaks volumes to a reflection of him as a human being as well. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and your passion.
Thank you, Claudia. I know that Charles would be just thrilled with your museum, as I have been, and be very happy that his photos are with you.
Well, thank you. Yes, it will be a wonderful opportunity to organize the exhibition and to bring people out to see these amazing photographs that really do speak to such an important transition that happened within the equestrian world in terms of women broadening their roles and availability to different types of activities, from jobs to being able to participate in sports as well. I was wondering if at any point in time Charles came across or talked about the Chronicle of the Horse magazine.
No.
It was just one of the possible crossovers that might have existed because they did have a lot of photography of equestrianism
really?
in it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
Okay, it was just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
But all right, well, I'm going to unshare the screen here.
Okay.
That should bring us back to, there we go. All right, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you again, Shirley.
Thank you, Claudia. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Good morning, Shirley. Looking forward to having another chat with you about Charles Rumph. When we finished our oral history the last time, there was a question that we would like to revisit, and that is a summarizing statement about what you see as Charles Rumph's legacy.
Thank you, Claudia. Nice to see you again. I think that if we had to sum up Charles's photography in one word, it would be fresh. And fresh meaning he was taking a new view of the world, of whatever he did. It was unique. It was original. Over the years, a number of art historians looked at his work. And I remember in particular, a curator, a photographer with the portrait gallery at the Smithsonian. And he had come to our house to see Charles's work, but of course he expected something rather mundane. And when he saw Charles's photos, he just gasped. He said, "These are so fresh. They're so original. I look at hundreds of photos every day, and I've never seen anything like this." And that basically was the reaction. Indeed, relating to your collection of his photographs of women and horses, one of the reviewers again used that word fresh, a new approach to photographing horses, and saying it's about time that he came along. Charles's work, whatever he did, was art. And in this photograph that we're showing right now, he took of himself. It is in our garden. But if you notice the composition, how he lined himself up with the tree and with his leg coming out to the right, it was just, it's a very artful composition. And yet he was able to do that with the camera set in front of him with a timer on and photograph himself. whatever he did turned into art, whether it was photographing houses for some realtor. They were beautiful. They were art. I still can't part with them today. It was just his way of seeing that was really not through training. It was really just natural. When he looked at anything, he just simply was framing it in a beautiful way. He never cropped or changed his photographs or did any of the kind of touching up that is done by digital photography today. He just took it as he saw it, as he wanted to look, and that was it. So in sum, his work was fresh, it was new, it was a very special eye in which anything, whether it was a mundane subject like a portrait or a house, he would turn into something beautiful. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Shirley, for joining us again this morning.